Sacking Mauricio Pochettino has to be one of the most ridiculous things that Tottenham Hotspurs has ever done. And they've done a lot of ridiculous things across the years.
Okay, so Spurs collapse. 6-1 defeat at St James's Park on Sunday. I have to admit, I did tune into this game a little bit later and then went back and watched the first 30 minutes. I did a double take. I can't be. And then I looked at it again. I had to look at it like 3 times. And then also looking at the time.
Yeah.
It was about 22, 23 minutes when I tuned in. I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. This was just as good as Newcastle were, as good as some of those goals were. This is one of the most astonishing, I think, collapses I've seen from any team of, as particularly what we call Spurs quality, a top 6 team.
A top 6 team in serious quotation marks for top 6 team. I was literally in the shower, got out the shower, and my phone's buzzing off, and I'm like putting my phone on my bed. I'm like creaming my body. I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm having a ball, thinking I'm going to tune into the matches quite later on. Everyone is literally blowing up my phone. My dad's calling me. My sister's calling me. And I'm thinking, what's going on? So I pick up the phone to my dad. I'm like, Dad, I just got out of the shower. Can you give me some privacy? And then he said, Spurs are down 4-0. I said, what? You are absolutely lying. I turn it on and I'm just like blown out of my mind. It was anything different from what I expected from Spurs. They defended the same. They looked really empty going up front. They looked really empty in the midfield. But Newcastle and Eddie Howe, big up Eddie Howe, he absolutely capitalised on every single weakness that Spurs had. It was an amazing watch.
If you're a Spurs fan and you're probably looking at those performances, it's probably just what you've seen for a majority of the season turned up to an 11 against a very good team. It's not like it's that much of a surprise that Newcastle beat Tottenham convincingly.
Yeah.
But it's the manner in which you are 5-0 down before half-time. Not even just like 45 minutes. It's like within under half an hour, you are 5-0 down. And it just speaks to the problems that I know Antonio Conte was saying before he left, that infamous now press conference after Southampton where his team collapsed. But I think the big question in the debate is what happens with Spurs and where do they go next? Because they look like a club completely lost now in terms of a number of coaching decisions, high-profile ones that haven't worked out. Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, post-Mauricio Pochettino.
Yeah.
I think the first question is, was sacking Mauricio Pochettino back in 2019 a bad decision?
Yeah. I feel like if you go all the way back to 2019, anyone would tell you that was an awful decision. I think they had a couple bad results. I think they played, was it Bayern Munich or was it Dortmund, where they lost 7-2? And it's like, you play a team of that quality, you lose 7-2. Okay, we get it. You just came from a Champions League final. You don't need to sack your manager after that, you know? Like, Jurgen Klopp, he just won, was it the Premier League that he just won, or the Champions League, one of the two? And he comes back, he loses 7-2 to Aston Villa, and, you know, he finishes just about 4th. He still keeps his job. And when you have a manager that is building something with your team, you don't just go and sack him. Like, sacking Mauricio Pochettino has to be one of the most ridiculous things that Tottenham Hotspurs has ever done. And they've done a lot of ridiculous things across the years. And I look at where they are right now, and I just think there's no saving them. Like, everyone was saying it's Jose Mourinho's fault, it's Antonio Conte's fault. No, the recruitment has been awful. The team is awful. There's so many gaps in that team as well. Eric Dyer, I'm not even going to speak on individuals, but certain individuals in that team shouldn't be playing for that team. And it just needs to be a clear out, a complete clear out. Until that happens, any manager that comes into this fold, they are going to struggle. The problem isn't with the managers. It's with the team and it's with the hierarchy. Something needs to change.
Well, I also think it's the problem of Levy and the club deciding in 2019 that, well, we've got close to winning titles with Pochettino, but what we now need is the results first guy. We're not going to massively alter the squad. Yeah. We're not going to refresh it, which is what Pochettino wanted, clearly, to make, because it clearly had run out of steam with those group of players in that period. It's not like Spurs were doing amazingly. They did look poor at the start of that season, but the decision was made, we're not going to change the squad. Instead, we're going to get Mourinho in to win now. And they've done that twice now with two coaches who were complete opposition to the kind of the group that had been built under Pochettino in the first place. It wasn't about highly defensive counter-attacking football. It was a progressive style of play that worked. And I think there's kind of two lessons from here. Is like that kind of approach now of looking just for the short term is not getting you the results you want anymore. It's not as effective as it used to be.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's Spurs losing their way as a club and understanding what they are as a club. Like, they aren't a club.
What are they as a club?
Of superstars. They're not Real Madrid.
Yeah.
They're not even recent Chelsea, which can kind of go through those cycles of coaches and win a trophy because there's kind of a culture embedded within the club of doing that in chaotic circumstances. They've gone completely away from that, and it's just... They've left themselves in this position now. You know, you look at a player like Harry Kane and Heung-min Son. Those are the two standout players and have been kind of carrying that attack for a number of years. And for Harry Kane, I've said this before, like, I think it'd be career malpractice if he stays there any longer.
Career malpractice.
Yeah, like, if he stays there any longer, like, he deserves what he gets effectively. Like, he needs to move now. Like, there's no kind of excuse anymore. Like, there's nothing there for him anymore. And I'd say it's the same for a player like Son, but Son committed his future to them quite recently.
What is their identity right now? Is there just a whole bunch of nothingness? Is it just a black hole? Like, there's just nothing there. And that's where the problem is, because I feel like every single team in this Premier League has an identity, right? If it's not the playing style, it's the fans. If it's not the fans, it's the manager, it's the system, it's kind of the hierarchy in the boardrooms and stuff. But with Tottenham, I just can't put my finger on it. And it's like what you said, like, they're aiming for something that just doesn't exist, especially within being at Tottenham as well, because they haven't experienced winning. They haven't experienced a winning culture. They haven't quite experienced a culture that Jose Mourinho would have brought in and Antonio Conte had brought in. So that caused a big fat rift as well. And we're forgetting, what's his name? What was the first manager that they sacked after Mourinho?
Nuno
Espirito. And he's gone on to win another trophy, hasn't he? He's gone on to win trophies.
That was another bizarre decision.
Bizarre.
Like, that whole mess of going for Conte, not getting him, going for other coaches during that summer post Mourinho, not getting them. What is Spurs' plan? Like, what are they aiming for? Are they aiming to buy experienced players? Are they aiming to buy a young core of players that for lower fees, like what Pochettino did so brilliantly? And it's tough to do that against an expensive Premier League with when you've got Newcastle now, you've got Man City, you've got Man United. It's not easy, but the fact that there's just nothing there to grasp onto, I think, is probably what makes a lot of Spurs fans feel hopeless about the future. And they don't have the wealth of, say, a Chelsea or a Liverpool, who can go out there and spend exorbitant amounts. So, I want to ask you, what do you think in terms of coaches? Like, who do you think? I have kind of a left field shout that I think would work for Spurs. Yeah. But who would you want to get in as the next coach?
Do you know what? Before I talk about the coaches, about the wealth thing with Spurs, right? This is so outlandish of me, but I feel like that's a whole facade that Levy and his whole group are hiding behind, because they have basically an NFL stadium, concert stadium, all of this all in one, right?
We're not talking about Leicester. We're not talking about Wrexham here.
I mean? We are talking about, this is a huge ass stadium, and going to that stadium, it's not cheap. It's not a cheap ticket. It's not like NFL's cheap. The concerts, they're not cheap either. I was buying Beyonce tickets the other day, paid like £400 for those tickets because it's not cheap to be at Tottenham Stadium. So where is this money going to?
Is the Spurs team worth £400 at the moment?
Lord knows. And I find it funny. Someone pointed out to me that when you actually go on the Tottenham website, it says, the stadium is a place for NFL concerts and Tottenham Hotspurs.
It's a branding exercise, effectively.
Excuse me? The stadium is Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for football. Like, NFL and concerts shouldn't be the first priority of that stadium. So that's another problem that Tottenham fans need to sort out. But in terms of coaches, the only option that I see, and I'm really, really want to hear your opinion, because I want to see how left field you're really going to go with this, but the only option I see is Nagelsmann. And even with Nagelsmann, I look at it as, okay, he comes in, what is the identity?
Yeah.
Like, what is the identity going to be? Of course, he's a young coach. What's he going to bring to the table as well? Because obviously he didn't do too badly with Bayern. I still think Bayern made a harsh decision sacking him at that time. But at the same time, he hasn't played in the Premier League. What's he going to bring? We don't know yet, So the only option is Nagelsmann for a decent coach. But I'm interested to see who's your left field.
I think Nagelsmann works because I think Leipzig and Tottenham are comparable in some way. Champions League football, it's not quite elite level in terms of club stature and expectation. So I think that would help Nagelsmann. My left field shout, well, it's actually two. It's either Brendan Rodgers or Graham Potter. And the reason I say for both of those is understanding the culture within the club. And like Graham Potter clashed against Chelsea in that aspect. Not only the mess at Chelsea this season, not all his own fault. I'm not, there's a lot of mess at Chelsea. But the reason I say coaches like that is I think if you're someone, the jump from, say, Brighton to Spurs is not as steep as, say, the expectation level that you have to go from, say, Brighton to Chelsea, or Brighton to Manchester United, or Brighton to Liverpool. I think for Potter, it feels like a good match because Spurs, as I say, don't have that expectation of winning titles. That's not what's expected of you, and maybe going in there and having that calm approach and having a collaborative approach where you're not a firebrand like Mourinho or Conte who have clashed up against Levy. I think Potter would be much more amenable to that and be able to build something. But Nagelsmann, I think, it is a fair shout. I think, tactically, he'd be a real coup. But I'm going to go Graham Potter or Brendan Rodgers as a left foot. I feel like that culturally they would fit the club a bit more.
I'd love to see Graham Potter back in employment because I feel like his time at Chelsea was pretty harsh, but I agree with you. I do think they're not as far left field as I thought they would be. When you explain it, it definitely does make sense. So let's bring Graham Potter back to employment and see what he does.
Or Beyonce.